Morning YouTube, Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Gonna have to make this video super fast 'cause I'm gonna have to go to work soon, but have another enhanced risk. This is the third day in a row we've had enhanced risk. This time it's just to the west of Texas, of Dallas over here in Texas. This is for Abilene towards Waco, but I do think that this is actually going to move a little bit further off to the east here after looking at these models recently. There is a 30% chance of hail here with hatched risk right here. And there's a secondary slight risk here as well. One towards the Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico. I guess you would call that the Quad State region, I would suppose. And then over here towards the East Coast here, towards parts of Virginia, North Carolina, even into Maryland here. There is also a slight risk for wind in all three of these areas, including the Gulf Coast over here towards Jackson, Mobile, Alexandria, Louisiana here. There is a tour threat here, and there's especially a tour threat over towards Waco and Abilene. Dallas, I would possibly see you being put in this later because I do think an update is due, and based off of what I saw in models on 06Z, it wouldn't surprise me. So make sure we're being weather aware over here in Waco, Dallas, and maybe even parts of eastern Texas here as well as we progress later into the evening. Do have 2% areas over here towards the Quad State region, towards the western high plains, and then of course the East Coast. Main area we're really going to focus on, because that's where things are kind of a little bit more crystal clear with the models, it's going to be more so towards Texas. Not to say nothing will happen in Colorado or the East Coast, but when I look at the runs here, I mainly see a lot more activity over towards Texas. This is the upper level jet here that I'm looking at. Temperatures are really warm across this region. There's plenty of moisture here. And this is heading into 22Z. This is over towards Abilene. When I start looking at the soundings, I've been getting tour soundings right here. So this isn't the most impressive setup kinematically, but it does actually improve as we get later into the evening. There's good potential for damaging winds here as well because we have a D-cape of 1625. We're more than 1.5 times over what you would need for there to be damaging wind potential. D-cape is basically slang for downward cape. And then looking at other parameters, there's not much of a cap here, or there's not much inhibition that should stop this from ongoing so long as storms begin to fire here. Lapse rates are at 7s, so there's potential for hail, and here's a good analog of it, about 3-inch hail. So it could be another big day here across this tiny little portion of Texas here, but this is a very heavily populated portion of Texas. We go towards this OOZ, and this is when I really start to expect things to pick up here. It's this little spot here to the east that I'm most concerned with, and this will be just to the west of Dallas. And this is when the soundings get really impressive here. There is a little bit of convective inhibition here, but not enough to really stop things from ongoing here. Significant tour rating or significant tornado parameter here is at 6.5, so it's pretty impressive here. You can see just about anything happen here, and this is probably one of the better soundings I've seen in a while here, so definitely something to keep a close eye on. There's no real contamination with this sounding here from the looks of it. Maybe towards the top level there could be a tiny bit, but I don't think that's going to be an issue. But 1409 for D-cape there, and then lapse rates again right around 7. So you can see just about anything with this kind of setup around, I would say 8 o'clock across the Dallas region, maybe Waco as well. So as we go forward, those parameters start to fade off, but we also have to keep an eye on the Gulf Coast here. I'm going to look over towards OOZ for this region. This will be still 7 o'clock central at this point. Marginal severe here, nothing too crazy to be worried about there. D-cape is at 931, so we are close to that 1,000 joule per kilogram mark for this region here. Is something to keep a close eye on. Main threat with this would be more so wind than hail, but not to say that we can't get hail. Lapse rates are still at about 6, so nothing to just scoff at, so to speak. Maybe a little bit later into the evening we could see a couple of storms fire off here. like I said, the setup for the eastern half of the country, like towards the east coast here, mid-Atlantic, not really a lot to go off of here. I think the most favorable spot for right now would be more so North Carolina. Even then, nothing really impressive right here. There's actually a little bit of a cap over the region. So, a lot of moving parts going here today as far as the weather setup's concerned. So, that being said here, once we get later into the evening, storm threat starts to diminish. And then Tuesday, there's another risk to look at there. Like I said, the pattern's picking up here. It's going to be pretty active here. We look at the short wave, and it's also pretty impressive over towards Texas in particular. We're pretty much going to be focusing on there from this point forward. This is heading into 23Z. We start to see a little pocket right here develop, and it's going to be on this southeastern flank where I'm most leery of weather developing. That quickly starts to dissolve here, though. But as it does, it's going to pretty much prime things up further. This is a little bit aft of Dallas here, OOZ. Again, not the most impressive kinematic setup, and not the most impressive hodiograph sounding, etc. But it does look like it starts to ramp up after about 6 or 7 o'clock central. So as we go forward here, we start to lose our parameters, of course, and then we have to look at the next day. Low-level jet really strengthens over Alabama, or the mid-level looks like it really ramps up over Alabama. Fortunately, the other parameters are not going to be present, so that's nothing to be concerned with there. The low-level jet, honestly, is the most surprising thing here. It's not a very, very powerful low-level jet by any stretch of the imagination here. I mean, you see a tiny little pocket develop over here, and it's in this tiny pocket where I'm concerned about weather developing there, maybe a couple of tornadoes. But outside of that, well, it does look like it does try to ramp up around 03Z. And if you compare the barbs, and I'm going to draw this out real quick, there was one barb that was going this way, actually. It's a bad arrow, but basically, if you were to look at where this barb is pointing here, for example, you were to take, for example, where this barb is pointing, you see where these two directions end up converging at. Basically, what you would do is put a pencil between your two hands and go in two different directions. You get spin. So that's pretty much what we're having going on there. So likelihood of tornadoes definitely is there. It's not the most impressive thing I've seen, like I said, but it's notable. As far as temperatures and dew points here are concerned, pretty impressive from the looks of things. 80s and 90s are expected across this region throughout the course of the day, and around the time the storms develop, we're still going to be in the 80s for a lot of these regions. Look over here, 87, 95. So definitely some sufficient numbers for severe weather initiation. Lift is always going to be a key component, especially with there being potential for convective inhibition at the surface. But I think we might have enough. I think we might have enough of a shortwave to maybe break that cap. It's going to be interesting to see how things unfold and what the models later in the day will indicate for us. But we do have a profound warm sector and a moist sector here. We're getting dew points into the 60s and 70s right around the time these storms fire. And the interesting thing is that this moist sector does not diminish even as we go into the overnight hours here. So we could see another day of severe weather on Tuesday here. So we're going to have to keep an extra close eye on that. We're going to go ahead and look at the Cape here. Cape has been explosive over Texas the last few days, and this won't be too much different. We're still getting around 3,000 plus joules per kilogram, more than sufficient enough for severe and even tornadoes here. 3,000, could see some 4,000s here towards central Texas. However, I think we're going to be away from the best ingredients for severe. I think this area is in a slight risk if I remember correctly. No, it's not actually. That could be expanded down to the south, though, as a result of that. There could be too strong of a cap, though, as well. So Like I said, a lot of moving parts with today's setup. But overall here, with the Cape being high, dew points high, like I said, the main point here that we might be missing is lift. So now the last thing that we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and look at the significant tornado parameter. Well, actually, it's not the last thing we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and also look at the composite reflectivity and get an idea what the radar could look like over the course of the day. But I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly where the probability for a significant tornado is highest. I see a little area of pink over here, so that would be representative of a 5, maybe even a 6, or 4, maybe a 5. And this is towards an area I was talking about earlier. Here's a 5. Here's a 5. Let's go ahead and look at that sounding. Yeah, I think that was the one we were looking at a little earlier. Very strong storm relative felicity here, by the way, too. Good low-level spin. But you see this little tiny curve here to the outside. That's something to keep an eye on because that could be representative of this convective inhibition. That happens, this could inhibit the storm from really starting to blossom and produce a tornado. But low-level jet usually kicks in around this time too. Like I said, there's plenty of fail parameters with this, but there's also plenty of reasons why this could really jump off here. So I have my concerns about this area. Thankfully, though, by the time we get towards 11, 12 o'clock, things start to fall off just a little bit. The significant tornado potential moves to the west, but the other parameters that would be needed for actual thunderstorm development, not really there. So I wouldn't be concerned with this if you're over towards central Texas. That being said, last thing we are going to look at is composite reflectivity, and then get the heck out of here. Alrighty then. So storms will begin to initiate probably around, about 6 o'clock. Really start to see a decent amount of coverage around 7. It's going to be mainly in our enhanced risk area. It's going to be a small area that we're looking at here. But these do look supercellular in nature. So the odds of these maybe going tornadic is a little bit higher if it goes like that. If these congealed into a line, however, mostly going to be expecting damaging winds. Towards these other regions where we have severe potential, I think earlier in the day is when we're going to see this little quad state western high plain region, maybe getting a few severe storms to pop off here. Main event's going to be here. Middle of the day, probably with some daytime heating, we'll start to see these storms over towards the Gulf Coast. And then same can be said for the evening hours across the mid-Atlantic, northeast type deal. And then before we know it, once we get towards about 05Z, which would be getting into the overnight hours, a lot of this is going to be starting to die down. There is one cell that kind of hangs around here, which I find kind of interesting. This forms on the flank of, I don't know if you would necessarily call this an MCS. I guess you would. But as a result, though, we may get one more storm that tries to fire off. I don't know if that one would make severe limits or not. We'll see what happens, though. Anyway, enough rambling from me. I got to get the heck out of here. I'm going to try to get this video up. But anyway, this has been Tire Metal Weatherman. I'll see you guys a little bit later today. We're probably going live for this one.